very pleased to have Ralf Schindler, who is going to speak on the definability of the non-stationary ideal.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, it's a big pleasure to be here. It's very nice, and it has been a wonderful conference. Thank you for still being here. All right, so I want to kind of talk about one specific problem. So it's really just one question, more or less, and I have two theorems. And I don't have too many slides, so I will leave this slide there for a while. No, so the question is, I mean, for many decades, people have been kind of studying how complicated is the non-stationary ideal, or which properties does the non-stationary ideal have, where in my talk, the non-stationary ideal will be the non-stationary ideal on omega 1. I don't have anything to say about larger cardinals. And this can be construed as part of generalized descriptive set theory. In this particular case, you consider the space omega 1 to the omega 1, and you consider a specific subset of that space, and you ask yourself how complicated is it. So this is the question. It's a question which I heard from Liu Zhenwu. I don't know if it had been around before. Okay, and I will give an answer. And it happens that the answer is the same when you assume that the universe is an LOV model, and whether you assume that Martin's maximum holds. So this is a case where these two theories agree with each other, which is not that often. But let's see. I will say a few more things about that. So which way? No, this is, okay. All right. So we talk about, in this area is always very confusing. There are a lot of negations, and you talk about stationary sets and non-stationary sets and the club filter and disjoint. Okay, so let's try. So you all know that a set is non-stationary if there is a club which is disjoint from it, okay? So this makes the non-stationary ideal, which is just the collection of all non-stationary sets, clearly sigma 1 definable in the parameter omega 1, right? It's absolutely trivial, right? You are non-stationary if there is this club and this is disjoint. You need the parameter of omega 1, of course, otherwise. All right. So now the question which was asked is, in standard descriptive set theory, there is this notion of, I don't know, universal or complete gamma sets, and you can wonder how complicated is a given set, and you study these kinds of things. So you might want to do that here also. So the question is, this is a particular set which is sigma 1 definable. Is it also pi 1 definable? And the first reaction would be, this is just nonsense. How would you ever define being non-stationary in a pi 1 way? Or in other words, how would you say that a set is stationary? You're stationary if you meet every club. How would you say that something is stationary in a sigma 1 way, right? I mean, let's say fixing. And when I say sigma 1, the parameters you want to allow, otherwise things become trivial, should be either just omega 1 or maybe a subset of omega 1, which would also be okay. All right, there has been a little bit of work on that. So maybe I should mention, I said these things about inner models before. You can show in L, for instance, that the non-stationary ideal is a complete sigma 1 set. We have to say what that means actually, but it's kind of obvious in this context. And this generalizes to L of E models. So in particular, the non-stationary ideal in L or in more general inner models is not pi 1. Okay. And in contrast to that, at least if you first look at, well, now let's study it under forcing axioms. You know, forcing axioms is one canonic. If you have questions about H omega 2, which apparently where the answers will be independent from ZFC, then I mean, what do you do? I mean, one candidate for you to work with is forcing axioms. Okay, so let's do that here. It turns out that maybe a bit as a surprise, the bounded proper forcing axiom is compatible with the fact that the non-stationary ideal is also pi1 definable in the parameter omega 1. So there is a joint paper with Hoffellner, Larsen, and Wu where we show this. All right. So this is a slightly older result, and now I want to come to these two newer theorems. So under the same pattern is still true under the unbounded proper forcing axiom. So it turns out that the proper forcing axiom is still compatible with the fact that you can say that something is stationary in a sigma 1 way. Right? Or in other words, that the non-stationary ideal can be pi1 definable in some parameter, which is a subset of omega 1. All right. And the other theorem is that Martin's maximum, or star, which is kind of in this context just a weaker principle than Martin's maximum, they both imply that the non-stationary ideal cannot be pi1 definable in any parameter from H omega 2. So I take this to mean that Martin's maximum gets it right. Because somehow, you know, whatever you might think about it. So this first theorem came somewhat as a surprise to me. This is a forcing construction, and I actually want to talk about the proof of that. And the second theorem falls out of this machinery by which David Aspero and myself had shown that star follows from Martin's maximum double plus. So it's a variant of that proof. I don't know a simpler proof. So the proof of theorem 2 is actually kind of complicated. Maybe there is a simpler proof, I don't know. If you have a Woodin cardinal in the universe, then there is a kind of easy proof that using the countable stationary tower. But if there is no Woodin cardinal, then it's more complicated. All right. So this is what I want to talk about. So I will sketch you a proof of both theorems. And I will start with the first theorem, and then I will prove the second theorem. All right? Is there any question? Okay, so let us start the proof of the first theorem. And if I were you, now I would fall asleep because I can never follow any proofs on slides. But okay, maybe some of you will. All right, you can try to follow because the argument, the key. You know, the key idea, once you have the idea, it's kind of simple, and then you just sit down and make it work. I will try to tell you what we are doing. There will be some coding going on, and the coding is not very complicated. The work is in showing that you will do some kind of forcing iteration. After all, we want to show that something is consistent with the proper forcing axiom. So you will force PFA, the proper forcing axiom, in kind of standard way, but on the side you will do something else in order to do this coding, so that in the end the non-stationary ideal will be pi1 definable, right? Okay. So in order to tell you how the coding looks like, this is really very simple, right? I mean, we heard about splitting stationary sets, Solovey's theorem. So I just give it a name, right? So a sequence of stationary subsets, which is pairwise disjoint, and each one of them is stationary, and the sequence has length omega 1. I just call it a splitting of omega 1 into stationary sets. And by Solovey's theorem, you can just do it. But it's for our construction, it is important that, so we will fix such a sequence, but it's important that we add that sequence at the beginning of our forcing iteration, which will produce P of A in a generic way. We cannot take it from the ground model, then nothing works. Okay, so if you add a Cohen subset of omega 1, then you also get such a splitting. That's a very easy exercise. Okay, so this will be the first step of our forcing iteration, that we add a Cohen subset to omega 1, and then we start our business. All right. So what we want to do, so how does the coding look like? So we fix our splitting of omega 1 into stationary sets, this A vector. And if you have any subset of omega 1 whatsoever, should be non-empty, I guess, and kappa is an ordinal above omega 1. I write kappa because in the case what we will actually be doing, kappa will be a former measurable cardinal. But for the definition, kappa is an ordinal above omega 1 and below omega 2. So if that's an ordinal, we say that the set S is coded at kappa, well, modulo this splitting. If there is a tower, basically of substructures of kappa, of countable subsets of kappa, which is strictly increasing and is continuous at limits, and something is missing here. I forgot the key thing. Is it on the next slide? No. This is very funny. So the key thing is missing, sorry. What I want is that there's the key item missing, right? I mean, the set S doesn't show up at all in none of these. So the key property is that, what does it mean for S to be coded? Well, you want to say that S is equal to the set of all, let's say, alpha, so that there is one of these sets from your tower, so that the order type of X sub I is in the alpha set from your splitting. No, this is called A. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So in other words, there is this tower, so that if you look at the order types of these things from the tower, they all lie in, well, you know, they don't lie in all the all these stationary sets, just in the ones where the index is an element of S. Okay. All right. So this is the kind of coding which we will do, right? So if you have an S, well, then this S will be coded at kappa in that way. Okay, and you can think about this in a slightly different way, and there is a variant of this concept. If you say that F sub kappa is the canonical function, I mean, this kind of this tower of the xi's. Remember that the union of these xi's is kappa, right? So this gives rise of a definition of the canonical function. The canonical function at I just being the order type of X sub I. So you could write this as S is the set of all alpha, so that the value of some at I of the canonical function is in A sub alpha. Of course, the canonical function is not unique, it's just unique on a club, right? Anyway, there is a slightly different concept, or stronger if you want. We say that S is honestly coded at kappa. if for all alpha less than omega 1, you have that alpha is in S, if and only if the set of all I, so that f sub kappa of I is in A alpha that's stationary. That's not said in the previous definition that in the previous definition we say that alpha is, if alpha is not in S, then this is actually an empty set. And if alpha is in S, then it's non-empty, but as a matter of fact in our construction we will have that it's stationary, and that will be important because what we want is once we code one set in this fashion, we don't want to lose the fact that we have this coding. And for that it's important that we have this property. All right, so this is the coding we want to do. All right. Yeah, I think here I wrote on everything and didn't forget an item. So there is an obvious forcing. So now if I can also give you this as an exercise. So if I give you a non-empty subset of omega 1, it still doesn't matter. I mean, I'm writing S because I have stationary sets in mind, but at this point it doesn't matter at all. It could just be a non-empty set, a non-empty subset of omega 1. And I give you a, well, let me give you a measurable cardinal kappa. Then there is a natural forcing associated to this whole business, which will force that S gets coded and in fact honestly coded at kappa in the generic extension. And you just force with countable initial segments, it's written there. So the forcing conditions are these P's, they are x sub i's where I is less than or equal to some countable theta. And you just write down all the natural conditions. So in the extension, you will have this coding business. And because kappa is a measurable cardinal, it's fairly standard to prove, that's also an exercise to prove that the forcing is semi-proper. Right. The key idea, is it on the next slide? Yeah. So the key idea to show that it's semi-proper is simply the fact right, if you have a countable substructure of some large theta, and let's say you have some measurable cardinal in here, right? So the picture is maybe that, well, I shouldn't write theta because anyway, so the theta is up here, the measurable cardinal is here, and there are the ordinals of the substructure. Because kappa is a measurable cardinal, you can find a bigger substructure so that the bigger substructure only has the only new points below kappa which the bigger substructure has are above the soup of the points below kappa which the old substructure has. So you only add points here as far as things below kappa go. And you can also, the order type of the ordinals of the new substructure below kappa, there are club many such order types, so you can choose the order type to be in a given stationary sets. And this allows you to show that the forcing is semi-proper. So you prove that in ZFZ from the fact that kappa is a measurable cardinal. All right. I'm sorry? Can you go to the previous slide? Yes, of course. Where is this thing? No. Sorry. This one. Oh, I see. I see. Okay. It's just nothing fancy here. You just write on the first forcing which would come to your mind to force this kind of coding. Once you swallowed what this coding actually means, then you just write it down. Okay. Okay, so this was kind of a sketch of the proof that the forcing is semi-proper in ZFZ given that kappa is measurable, and in the forcing extension, S is coded at kappa as well as honestly coded at kappa, just as being given by the order types of the xi's which you get from your generic. Okay. Okay, and this is what we want to do. So what we want to do is we want to do a forcing iteration. So along the way, we will add new subsets of omega 1. Some of them will be stationary. And then by some bookkeeping, we want to say that if the bookkeeping tells me, now look at this or that stationary set, code it, okay. So what we're going to do is we do a countable support iteration. Remember that we want to get PFA in the forcing extension. So we will do a countable support iteration. So this is just an ad hoc term here. We call it appropriate if, okay, I said that the first step of our forcing iteration should be that we generically add the splitting of omega 1 into omega 1 stationary sets. And then there are two issues. Remember, we want to force the proper forcing axiom. So either at a given stage C, we will consider our next proper forcing. So this will be typically done at limit stages. And at successor stages of the iteration, there will be some name S dot floating around, and there will be a kappa, so that it's going to force at that stage that S dot is a non-empty stationary. Well, I guess stationary sets are never empty. It's a stationary subset of omega 1. Kappa is a measurable cardinal, and the next forcing we do is exactly the forcing we just discussed. Okay, so that's how it is. Okay, and this is just a setup of the whole thing. So you put it all together, basically. So what's going on? So we want to get PFA. The only known methods how to get PFA is starting with a super compact cardinal. So you take a super compact cardinal. I just wrote down some of the usual things to set up the thing. I'm not sure this is the standard notion of a Laver function, but this is I would say the most handy version of a Laver function in this context. So a Laver function is this function capital F, which will tell us at a given stage which forcing to look at next, right? So it has the property that whenever you have an x in V, then you have this elementary embedding from some h theta bar into a big h theta, basically into V, so that the critical point of this J will get mapped to your super compact cardinal. X will be in the range, and well, J of what the Laver function tells you at delta bar, there is a bracket missing, is exactly X. Okay, so F of delta bar will give you an object, and this object will be mapped by J to X. Okay, this is, if you think of a Laver function that way, the proof that in the extension, when you, let's forget about the coding business, when you use this Laver function to give you the next proper forcing, in an attempt to force the proper forcing axiom, this characterization will give you exactly what you want in a very natural way. So it makes it very easy. And it's also an exercise to show that if you have a super compact cardinal, then there is a Laver function in this sense. Okay, this is a variation of the argument that a super compact cardinal can be characterized in this what's sometimes referred to as the Megador characterization of a super compact cardinal. All right, so every super compact cardinal has its Laver function, and then with it we just define our iteration, right? It's exactly what you would now think. So the first step is what we call an appropriate iteration. So we first add the splitting of omega 1 into omega 1 many stationary sets. At limits, we ask the Laver function which forcing we should do next. So in many cases, it might be true that the Laver function gives you something where at the current stage it's forced that this is a name for a proper forcing, and otherwise it is something trivial. And at successors, don't read it, right? At successors, basically what you want to do is you look at the next stationary set and you look at the next coding forcing as we defined it. All right, there is a little wrinkle here, but I don't want to go into details. but it's all pretty easy. Okay. Now, recall, we said, okay, so which forcings do we use, right? I mean, we use proper forcings at limit stages, and we use semi-proper forcing at successor stages. So the whole iteration you might think is semi-proper. Proper is also semi-proper, so it's a semi-proper iteration. I said we do a countable support iteration. Well, the thing is that the entire iteration, so this is the first line here, the entire iteration is actually proper, even though there are steps of the iteration which are semi-proper. And the reason is that, that's not a very hard argument. The reason is that we work with this splitting which is given to us by a cone subset of omega-1 in the beginning. If you started with a splitting which exists in the ground model, just forget about it, it doesn't work. Then you could only show that the forcing is, that the iteration is semi-proper if you did that way. Or in other words, think of it that way. If you, let's do first the first step and then look at the tail end of the iteration. That's an only semi-proper. But the entire thing, including the first step, is actually proper. And the reason is kind of, I mean, very vaguely speaking, that you have complete freedom with respect to this cone subset of omega-1 to serve some, you know, to fit with something which we will do later somehow. Well, okay. So it is a proper forcing, so this makes it kind of nice. And in the now you have to study what's going on in the forcing extension, the final forcing extension, when you go up to the super compact cardinal. Okay, so in the third item it says that PFA holds true. That's the standard argument, because we use this Lever function to take care of all the necessary proper forcings. So in the second line it says that, maybe I didn't stress it, or I hope I said it, right? I mean, in the successor case, we do this kind of coding which we discussed in the case, yeah, I did say it, right? In the case that we have a name for a stationary set, right? Not for a non-stationary set. We only code stationary sets. So it's kind of trivial that if you do the coding, then at that stage, when you just did it, then your given set is coded at this former measurable cardinal, right? But it's also, as we called it, honestly coded. So if something is not in your set, then blah, blah, blah is non-stationary. And if something is in the set, then, you know, the set of all these i's, so that these order types are in A alpha, this is stationary. And if you do a, let's just forget about proper, if you do a semi-proper iteration and you look at the tail end of such an iteration, you will not kill stationary sets, subsets of omega-1, which show up at a given stage, right? The tail ends of the iteration don't kill the stationarity. That's important. Okay, so this is important here. So once you coded a given set, it will remain, it will stay coded forever, right? You don't kill that fact. So by bookkeeping, every stationary set will get coded at some point. And then the final thing you have to do is to verify that if a set is not stationary, then it doesn't get coded. And this makes a difference to Martin's maximum, actually, right? So remember that we said that this coding forcing, this is semi-proper, in particular it's stationary set preserving. So if we tried to force MM instead of just PFA, at some point, you know, our bookkeeping would tell us, well, now do this coding forcing, and there is no way to prevent it. So in fact, every subset of omega-1 would get coded. But here we have control, and it turns out that if a set is not stationary, so we did not on purpose code it, and it will not get coded accidentally. Okay, so this is something you have to verify. So in the forcing extension, a set will be coded at some kappa, which is below omega 2, if and only if it is stationary in the extension. Okay, so that makes being stationary sigma 1, because you can say a set is stationary if and only if there is this kappa, there is this tower of xi's, and then you have this property, that's the sigma 1 statement. What is the parameter? The parameter is the splitting of omega 1 into the disjoint stationary sets, right? Okay, let me see. All right. So this was the proof that modular that I left out all the details of the actual argument. There is a little bit you have to do. This was the proof that that PFA is consistent with the fact that the non-stationary ideal is delta 1. All right. So now let's move on to a sketch of the argument why under MM the non-stationary ideal is not being stationary is not sigma 1. Let's think of it that way. Okay. So stationary is certainly pi 1, but we want to see that it's not sigma 1. Okay. And I told you that the only proof I know which does not use extra large cardinal hypotheses is a variant of this proof by David Asbro and myself that star is implied by Martin's maximum double plus. So I will tell you a little bit about this and then do hand waving and that's it. Okay. So what do you want to do? There is this concept. So what do we have to do? So we want to say we work under MM. Let's assume that being stationary can be expressed in a sigma 1 way. So there is a sigma 1 formula with a parameter from h omega 2. Let's say the parameter is a subset of omega 1. And something is stationary if and only if S is stationary if and only if this formula holds true of S in this parameter. Okay. What you want to do is, the key idea is kind of very simple. So what you want to do is you want to go to a forcing extension. We should do, you go to a forcing extension and we work under MM, so all our forcings should be stationary set preserving. So you want to do a stationary set preserving forcing where you have a new, maybe I should write it down. Right, suppose you have that S is stationary, a stationary subset of omega 1, if and only if you have the sigma 1 formula, and it's true of S, and this is your fixed parameter. Let's write P for parameter. This is a subset of omega 1, let's say, okay? So suppose you have this situation. So what you want to do is I want to show that under MM there is actually a non-stationary set, which is so that phi holds true of that set, contradiction. All right, so how do I do that? What I want to do is first, in the first step, I want to add a set S, which is not in the ground model and which still satisfies this property. And I want to do it in a way, this new S should have the property that I can shoot a club through the complement without killing ground model stationary sets. So what's the relevant property? Well, you know, that if you have a ground model stationary set T, then T minus this new S, that should always be stationary. Because then when I shoot a club through the complement of S, I don't kill any ground model stationary sets. Okay, so this is the key property. So I want to add a new set S with this property that's always stationary for a T in a stationary set in the ground model. And then I can do my club shooting through the complement. So it's a two-step iteration. So the second step of the iteration is a well-known thing. And the first step of the iteration, oh, this looks a bit tricky, right? Because I don't know anything about this formula. This is just a formula, right? So I need a new set S, which satisfies phi and has this additional feature. And so as I told you, if you have a Woodin cardinal, it's kind of easy. But if you don't have a Woodin cardinal, what we will do is the following. We will break it up into, again, 2 steps. The first observation will be that it's kind of consistent to have such a set S with the properties as I try to describe. And then from the fact that it's consistent, you cook up a forcing which actually forces such an S to exist in the forcing extension. Okay, so the relevant concept here, which you can use, is that of honest consistency. So there is a definition here. Basically, it's a variant of well, it's a variant of kind of capital omega logic, if you want, or closeness under universally bare functions. But it's actually in our context not really necessary that we talk about it in that generality, but maybe it's natural to do that. So if you have a universally bare function and you have a model, this A in V of G, which exists in a generic extension, which may actually be countable in V of G, you can very easily define what it means for A to be closed under the universally bare function, or F closed. It's just what you think. You know, F has a new meaning in the generic extension because it was universally bare. And then you just want to say that according to this new canonical new meaning of F, the model A is closed. All right. All right, and now we are kind of in this situation. So you have any set X whatsoever, and you have a sigma 1 formula in the language of set theory. And we can even do with a predicate for the non-stationary ideal. And we say that phi of X is honestly consistent. So this is a variant of omega consistent, if you want, which fits into our framework here and our purpose of cooking up a stationary set preserving forcing. We say that this is honestly consistent if whenever you give me a universally bare function, not only will there be a model of phi of X, but there will be an F-closed transitive model, A, existing in some outer universe. So it's in a collapse extension of V, where you collapse some capital omega to omega. The model contains a chunk of the universe. In particular, it contains H sub omega 2 of the universe, and it contains this X. It has the feature that if a set in V, a subset of omega 1 in V is stationary, then it's stationary in A. Certainly in the world where A exists, that's not true, but it could be that A itself doesn't kill stationary sets of V, right? And A is a model of, let's say, Z of Z or Z of Z minus and this property phi of X. So that's the notion of honest consistency. Okay. This is what I wrote down here, right? This is what we want to shoot down under MM. We suppose that there is a sigma 1 formula. Now I'm writing psi here in a parameter which is basically a subset of omega 1, so that this gives a characterization of stationary. Okay, we want to show that that's not true. Okay, so as I told you, the first step we break up, I told you that there will be this 2-step iteration where we will force the existence of a set which is not stationary and it satisfies phi. That is a sigma 1 statement, right? Phi is a sigma, or now it's called psi. Psi is a sigma 1 formula. So the statement that there is a non-stationary set S which satisfies psi the statement that there is a non-stationary set S which satisfies psi, this is a sigma 1 fact. So if we can force it to be true by a stationary set preserving forcing, then it was already true under MM, and we have a contradiction. So that's what we want to do. And we discussed what the second step is, right? This club shooting through the complement, this business standard stuff. So we want to force the existence of an S, which actually has the properties as an item 1 here, right? So it satisfies Psi, and it also has this property that we will be able to shoot a club through the complement without killing ground model stationary sets, right? All right, so this is what we want to do. So we break up the task of cooking up a forcing into the task of, well, first we show that what we want is honestly consistent, and then from there we will cook up a forcing which actually forces the existence. So we are interested in statement 1. Now there is a statement 2 which looks completely odd, right? But that's actually, for the purpose of the forcing, that's a key thing. And I have no idea how to get rid of that. I mentioned now, I think 2 times that what we want to do is, from the fact that that 1 is honestly consistent, we want to cook up a forcing which actually forces 1 in the stationary set preserving. If we did not have 2, I had no idea how to do it. So a famous statement which is honestly consistent, and I don't know how to force with this machinery, is omega 2 has cofinality omega 1. It's very easy to force it by even sigma closed forcing, but this machinery doesn't work in this context. Okay, so I can only handle statements which are compatible with 2, namely that the cofinality of omega 2 in V is omega. Okay, but it's easy to see that you get 2 automatically if you know. Okay. I'm not sure I will be able to tell you why I need 2. It comes up in the technical part of the proof. Okay, so this slide discusses what I have been telling you anyway, right? How the organization of the argument will be. So this I already told you. Okay, is this the last slide or what? Oops, I see. Okay, I see. Yeah. Let me just check. So I have like 10 more minutes or something. I don't know to which slide I should go. Let me show you that this is true by a picture. That's kind of easy. So you have V here, or if you want H theta, right? And no, this is not a good pen. What we will do is we will just take a substructure. So you take a substructure of V of size LF1 with critical point being the pre-image of omega 2. So there is omega 1 down here. I don't know, this is H, goes here. So this is the critical point. Okay. You can form such substructures in a way that the V cofinality of this point is omega, right? This is no problem. Okay. And remember this kind of thing. So you take a substructure where this has size LF1, you have this cofinality, and under MM, in fact, under MA omega 1, the non-stationary ideal is not omega 1 dense. So when you look at the stationary, every stationary set of this model is stationary in V because you have this embedding, so this is trivial. If you look at the collection of stationary subsets of omega 1 from this model, over here, there will be an S like there with respect to the T's which exist in this model, right? Okay, so there is a new stationary set up here, so that if you take any stationary set T here, T minus S will be stationary. Okay, And of course, the S over here satisfies the sigma 1 statement. All right. So what you have is that there is an outer model to H, namely H theta, where this situation is realized. Okay. And then you do an, an absoluteness argument. You go to a generic extension where you collapse the relevant stuff, and you argue. It's basically a statement which is absolute between forcing extensions of H and, if you want, V, or the same forcing extension of V, that if over there you have this thing, blah blah blah, then you have it in here. So you will have that H thinks that this statement is honestly consistent, and then you just move it up. So that's a kind of easy thing. Maybe it was a bit fast, but it gave you some hint. So that part is actually easy to, if you swallowed what it means for a statement to be honestly consistent, there is an easy Skolem argument to show that that's actually true. I ignored this stuff about universally bare and so on, but this can all be plugged in and very, very easy. Okay. And now we come to the key thing, but I think I'm just not going to talk about it. Now you have the statement that this is honestly consistent, and now what is going on is that you plug in the machinery from my paper with David Aspro, that you write down the forcing. So the forcing conditions are finite approximations. So the forcing which you now write down looks for a model which realizes this situation, where you're not really interested in 2. You couldn't care less about 2, but for technical reasons you will need it in order to prove that the forcing is actually stationary set preserving. Okay. So your forcing conditions search for a complete and consistent theory of the whole thing in a way that the forcing extension will be stationary set preserving. And so if you just do it naively, you can always do this, like in the fashion, I mean, after all, we all know how to prove Gödel's completeness theorem, right? We can write down in the appropriate language, we can write down a language so that and we can let the formulas of the language search for a complete and consistent extension of what you would want to have. But if you just do it naively, you will just collapse everything relevant to omega, right? Okay. And that's not what we want to do. This is where what the wrinkle is, or where the hard work is, that you do it in a way that, well, this is your guiding idea, kind of, but then you have to plug in some kind of side condition business, and actually it's not really side conditions, it's kind of side conditions which don't even exist in V. So there are kind of names for side conditions or something, think of it that way. And this is kind of, in this business, this is where 2 comes in. Maybe if you're curious, I can tell you what is the role of 2. It doesn't answer the question, but what does 2 give you? Well, 2 gives you, remember that we work under Martin's maximum, and the non-stationary ideal is saturated. What 2 gives you is that if you look at the structure H omega 2 of V, in a model where 2 is realized, in a model which proves that these 2 statements are honest consistent, remember this also means that you don't kill stationary subsets of omega 1 in that model. Okay, you will have that H omega 2 of V is a generic iterate in omega 1 steps of a countable structure. This is exactly what 2 gives you, right? You can take a hull of H omega 2 of V, which is cofinal in omega 2 of V, in that model A, which witnesses honest consistency, and then because the non-stationary ideal is saturated, you can derive kind of a measure from the embedding, and it's actually generic for the version of the non-stationary ideal of this collapsed countable structure, and you can blah blah blah. Okay, so what you will get is that's what hypothesis 2 gives you, that omega 2 of V is a generic iterate of a countable structure. And this doesn't answer the question, why do you need that, right? It comes up in the proof of when you show that the forcing is stationary set preserving, because there you want to, well, do something. I shouldn't start trying to explain it, but maybe I made you a little bit curious, and you're very welcome to look into our paper. It's all written there. Okay, all right. So you see, I had enough slides. So this is the last slide. I don't know, there are some open questions maybe. I talked about, I think, an open question which I did not talk about, but which I should have, because I just realized too late. My student Eric pointed this out to me. So this was all about sigma 1 and pi 1. You can ask, what about sigma 1, 1 and pi 1, 1? Well, what does it mean, right? So we are in the space omega 1 to the omega 1. So basic open sets you might want to define in the usual way. And then, well, a set should be sigma 1, 1 if it's a projection of a closed set. It turns out that under MA omega 1, every subset of that space is sigma 1, 1. That's kind of weird. I don't know if this was noticed before, probably. It must have been noticed. But you could work with a slightly different concept of sigma 1, 1, where you say, well, a set is open, not if it's an arbitrary union of basic open sets, but if it's a union of basic open sets where the indices of the basic open sets are, that's a set of reals if that's given by a universally bare set, and that's more natural. And then you could actually show that in the context of MM, the non-stationary ideal is not pi 1, 1, pi 1, 1, right? Here we showed that under MM, it's not pi 1 in any parameter from omega 2. And if you use that definition of pi 1, 1, you could show it's not pi 1, 1. Whereas if you use the other definition, every set is sigma 1, 1, and therefore also pi 1, 1. Okay. I don't know. I'm not a generalized distributive set theory person, so maybe you can help me. And I don't know what the standard definitions there are. So it looks like there are a lot of traps you can fall in, and things can be trivial because you use the wrong definition. And I propose this definition. So open means union of basic open sets where the index set is universally bare. That's, of course, then not a topology. All right. So one other questions are, under PFA, can the non-stationary ideal be pi 1 just in the parameter omega 1? We don't know, I think. Our parameter which we used was the splitting of omega 1 into disjoint stationary sets. You know, there are all these kinds of things. Can you have PFA plus NS omega 1 saturated, and NS is pi 1? So a fragment, a bigger fragment of MM, if you want, is that still consistent? So what's the threshold? And the last question is very annoying because I have no idea. You might want to define what it means for a set to be a complete sigma 1 set, and whatever you write down in a natural fashion only works under CH, and unfortunately MM is not compatible with CH. But there should be some notion of a complete sigma 1, or if you want sigma 1, 1 set, and you want to prove that NS omega 1 is, you know, we showed that it's not pi 1. All right, so it's a kind of proper sigma 1 set. Next question, is it a complete sigma 1 set? And what does complete mean? So if there is a complete set, oh, by the way, so this is, I told you, so let's go back to the very beginning of my talk. So in the L of E models, that's actually true. If you, I said under CH, there's a natural notion of complete, or the natural notion works very well under CH, so in particular in the L of E models. And there you can actually show that that's true. So that's maybe at this point an advantage of the L of E models, because there is this answer. But here there should also be an answer. And it's open. Okay, thank you very much.
So are there any questions, please, or comments? There. Go ahead.
Say something goes wrong, you cannot. It's kind of theory which says, okay, there is a compiler sequence, kind of simple.
So the forcing with Aspera needs the fact that H omega 2, that in this witness to the fact that the given statement is honest consistent, you also need that in this witness it's true, in this model which witnesses this, it's true that the H omega 2 of the ground model of V is a generic iterate of a countable structure. That,
no, but I mean,
yeah.
This, okay, so your method kind of works, I write down a theory and then I do variation of your argument.
Yeah.
And hopefully it produces SSP poset, which gives you model for that theory. So let's say my theory is basically there is a cofinal omega sequence in omega 2.
Yes.
And then I start
that contradicts what I just said. Because what I just said implies that the cofinality of omega 2 is omega. And if it's both, you collapse omega 1. And then the model collapses omega 1.
I mean, so you use this is what I mean. You say that your method cannot produce, like, forget the other model side. I'm only interested in producing, basically number forcing.
Sorry, which forcing?
The number forcing.
Number,
like,
yeah.
I just want to make omega 2 of finality omega.
Oh, omega.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about omega 1, sorry.
Oh, so sorry, maybe I misspoke. Okay, so because you have this condition, but you say you need to kind of put it on top. You cannot just get it from your machinery. So, no? Okay.
What is the question?
Okay, so you say a thing is honestly consistent with something, etc. Plus you have this condition called omega 2v is omega.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the question might be something like, let's say just this statement called omega 2v equals omega, I guess it is honestly consistent.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you, can you do your construction?
Yeah, of course the answer is yes. I can do it, but it's a very, very complicated way of forcing this statement. It would be a very complicated way of forcing that statement. You can do it. It's, after all, it's some kind of number type forcing. I mean, I'm not sure it adds a number sequence. I never thought about it, but it's certainly, the forcing certainly gives omega to, the forcing arranges that the cofinality of omega 2 in the extension is omega, and the cofinality of omega 3 in the extension is omega 1, as it should be. In which model? I mean, the model A only exists in a generic extension of V, where you collapse some big enough cardinal. So in our situation here, we would collapse omega 2 to omega, and then the model without loss of generality is just countable in that extension, right? Because it only exists in the extension, it doesn't make any sense to ask what's the size in V or something. Of theta, you mean theta of whatever, L of R or some, oh, I see. Is omega of the universally bare sets, that's difficult. It's always bigger than omega, right? Or you mean the ground model, theta? I think it's completely open. If you can make the cofinality of the V theta omega if and only if it's not omega 1, right? In a honest, consistent way. And even you can force it if and only if. But Not sure I know. I think this all leads to questions where we don't know the answer to. In particular, the cofinality of theta infinity under, let's say, MM is open what it is. There are not many possibilities, but we don't know if MM decides it or if it's independent.
Very divergent models consistently with.
I have no idea. Are you asking if this machinery might tell you something about it, or just okay? I don't know.
I seem to remember that
Uh-huh.
question.
Yeah, it's probably also related to, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it would be simpler, and I actually have to say I didn't really think about it. I don't know. I don't think it would be simpler. I don't know.
Do we have one more question?
I mean, certainly you don't need full MM, right? What we use here is, in order to make the forcing work, we need that the non-stationary ideal is precipitous. So that's one thing we need, and then we need just bounded Martin's maximum besides that. I don't know how to get rid of n as omega 1 is precipitous. Which I think is also open if, just to say, I think it's open if BMM actually implies it. Could be.